Imagine surviving on 70 pounds a week. Not as a student experiment, not as a minimalist lifestyle choice, as your reality. As the only thing standing between you and nothing. Now imagine that 11 years later, you are earning more in a single afternoon than most people earn in a lifetime. And you are not working harder. You are not working more hours. You are not even in the office. The money is simply arriving. While you sleep, while you eat breakfast, while you take your kids to school. That is not a fantasy. That happened to one person. And the gap between those two realities was not luck, and it was not magic. It was a single shift in how she thought about what her time was actually worth.
Today, you are going to understand that shift. And by the end of this, you will never look at your paycheck the same way again. Most people are trained from childhood to do one thing with their skills: sell them once. You show up, you work, you get paid, you go home. You show up again tomorrow. The money stops the moment you do. Economists call this linear income. Your time in equals your money out. It is a perfectly logical system. It is also a ceiling with no way through it. What J.K. Rowling stumbled onto and then executed with extraordinary precision was something different. She learned to create an asset, something that sells while she sleeps, something that earns on a Tuesday in Tokyo and a Friday in Sydney without her lifting a pen. And the story of how she got there, from a cold Edinburgh flat to a global empire worth over $1 billion, is one of the most instructive financial case studies you will ever encounter.
Let us start at the bottom, because the bottom matters. Before Harry Potter, before Hogwarts, before any of it, Joanne Rowling was a researcher and bilingual secretary working for Amnesty International in London. It was steady work, respectable work, and it paid a fixed salary that arrived reliably every month and stopped just as reliably the moment she stopped showing up. This is what economists and financial educators call Phase 1, trading time for a capped, predictable paycheck. Then, in 1993, everything fell apart at once. A marriage ended badly in Portugal. She moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, a city where she knew almost no one, as a jobless single mother with a baby daughter and a partially written manuscript in a folder. She had no income, no savings cushion, no professional network in publishing. She qualified for state benefits and spent months in a cramped flat, surviving on support payments of around £70 a week. During this period, she was diagnosed with clinical depression. She later described herself as the biggest failure she knew, and by conventional metrics, she was right. She had no employment, no capital, no assets. She was entirely dependent on a system designed to keep people from starving, not to help them build anything.
Here is the financial lesson buried inside that misery, and it is not an obvious one. Poverty is not simply an absence of money. Poverty is an absence of leverage. When you are broke and responsible for a child, 100% of your cognitive bandwidth goes to immediate survival. Where is the next meal coming from? Will the heating stay on this month? Can I cover this week? There is no mental space left for the long game. There is no time to build. There is only time to survive. Rowling broke that cycle in the only way available to her. She used the scraps of time her situation allowed, while her daughter napped, while she sat in warm cafes to avoid paying for heating at home, to build something that no one could take away from her. An idea, a world, a manuscript. She had no capital, so she invested the only resource she actually possessed, her mind and her hours. Economists call this sweat equity. What it really means is using what you have before you wait for what you wish you had. She wrote by hand. She typed on a borrowed typewriter. She did not have a computer. She did not have an office. She had a story she believed in, a thermos of coffee, and whatever time she could carve out between the demands of poverty and parenthood. If you are waiting for the right conditions to start building something, Rowling's story removes that excuse entirely. She wrote one of the most successful creative works in human history inside a financial crisis with no resources and no safety net. Capital is not what you start with. Your mind and your available hours are your starting capital. Now, the manuscript was finished, and the market said no. 12 times. 12 separate publishing houses reviewed the first Harry Potter book and passed. Some said children's books don't sell. Some said it was too long. Some said the market was saturated. The manuscript that would eventually generate billions of dollars in revenue was considered by a dozen professional gatekeepers to be commercially unviable. This is a critical moment in the financial education this story offers. Markets are bad at valuing unproven assets early. This is true of startups. It is true of real estate in emerging areas. It is true of index funds after a crash. And it was true of a wizard novel from an unknown author in 1996. Bloomsbury, a small London publisher, finally offered a deal. The advance was £1,500, less than Rowling had survived on in benefits over the previous year. She accepted it without hesitation because she understood, even then, that the advance was not the point. The ownership was the point. And this is where the story shifts from an inspiring personal narrative into a masterclass in asset architecture. When Harry Potter became successful, and it happened fast, Rowling was presented with a series of decisions. Studios wanted the film rights. Merchandise companies wanted the characters. Theme parks wanted the world. Global publishers wanted translations. And in every single negotiation, Rowling and her representatives made the same fundamental choice. They did not sell. They licensed. There is a difference between those two words that can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When you sell a right, it is gone. You receive a lump sum, and the future value of that asset flows to whoever bought it. When you license a right, you retain ownership. You give someone permission to use your asset in exchange for a percentage of what it earns. You continue to receive income for as long as the asset generates value. Rowling kept the digital ebook rights entirely to herself, an almost unheard of move at the time, and one that allowed her to launch Pottermore and control her own digital revenue stream. She retained veto power over theme park design. She negotiated merchandise percentages from film productions. She did not just write books. She became the chairperson of a global intellectual property holding company, with her name as the brand and the wizarding world as the inventory. Here is the economic reality underneath all of that. A book costs the same amount of time and creative energy to write, whether 100 people buy it or 100 million people buy it. The marginal cost of each additional copy approaches zero. This is what makes intellectual property fundamentally different from labor. When you sell your time, the income is capped by the number of hours in a day. When you create an asset, the income is limited only by how many people in the world want what you made. Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize-winning economist from Yale, has written extensively about what he calls the narrative economy. The idea that stories and ideas are among the most powerful economic forces in the world. Rowling did not just write stories. She built an economic narrative so sticky, so transportable, so infinitely reproducible that it generated value in 30 different languages, across 6 different continents, in film, in print, in merchandise, in theme parks, in theater, in digital games, for more than 25 years. If you are watching this right now, if you found value in what this channel teaches, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to After Tax Academy. Every week, this channel breaks down the financial mechanics behind real wealth so you can start applying them to your own life. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode.
Now, what does any of this have to do with you? You are probably not writing a fantasy novel. You may have no interest in children's books or wizards or publishing. That is completely irrelevant to the lesson. The lesson is structural. The lesson is about the difference between selling your time once and creating something that sells indefinitely. So the question you need to sit with is this.
What can you create once that can be duplicated infinitely? Think carefully before you answer, because the list is longer than most people realize. Software and code can be written once and sold to thousands of users with no additional effort per sale. An online course can be recorded over a weekend and sold to students in every time zone for the next decade. A digital template for budgeting, for project management, for a business process can be built in an afternoon and downloaded 50,000 times. A brand, a methodology, a framework, a body of educational content. These are all assets in the same structural category as Harry Potter. They cost something to build the first time. They cost almost nothing to replicate.
William Bernstein, the financial theorist and author of The 4 Pillars of Investing, makes the point that the most durable wealth in the modern economy flows not from wages, but from ownership, from equity, from assets that produce returns whether or not you are working that day. The difference between a high-earning employee and a wealthy person is often not income level. It is the presence or absence of something they own. That brings us to the second lesson from Rowling's story, and it is one that most people get completely wrong when they first build something of value. Do not sell the equity too early. When Rowling was deep in poverty, £1,500 felt like a fortune. But she did not take the advance and sign away her future royalties. She did not sell the film rights outright for a flat fee. She did not trade her characters for a lump sum payment. She held the ownership and structured her deals around ongoing participation in the asset's value. She rented her brain instead of selling it.
This principle applies directly to your life. If you build a business, guard your equity before you take on partners or investors. If you create educational content, pursue licensing and subscription models rather than one-time flat sales wherever possible. If you develop expertise, build frameworks around it that can be packaged and sold independently of your direct time. The person who sells a skill once earns once. The person who packages that skill into a system earns indefinitely. And here is the third lesson, perhaps the hardest one to implement in practice. Rowling did not immediately inflate her lifestyle when the money started arriving. She used her early earnings to fund the creation of the next asset. Books 2 through 7 were not written on a yacht. They were written with the same discipline, the same focus, and the same creative investment as book 1, just without the poverty and the borrowed typewriter. Each successive book was a new asset built from the surplus generated by the previous one. This is what financial educators mean when they talk about reinvestment. Your day job income, your linear time for money paycheck is not your destination. It is your fuel. It is the capital that buys you the time and resources to build the exponential asset alongside it. The goal is to keep your lifestyle from expanding faster than your asset base. Because the moment your lifestyle cost exceeds your passive income, you are back in the trap. Thomas Piketty, the French economist whose work on inequality reshaped how the world thinks about wealth concentration, documented extensively that the return on capital consistently outpaces the return on labor over long periods. What that means in plain language is this: money that owns things earns faster than people who work for things. Not because the system is fair, it often isn't, but because assets compound and labor doesn't. Rowling figured this out not by studying economics, but by surviving poverty long enough to build something that transcended it. The real rags to riches magic in her story wasn't wizardry. It was math. It was the math of scalability. It was understanding that one asset, built carefully, protected fiercely, and replicated at near zero marginal cost, could generate income that 1,000 hours of linear work never could. She went from £70 a week in welfare payments to out-earning the Queen of England, not by working harder, but by working differently, by shifting from selling her time to owning her output. And now, the question that matters more than anything else in this video. What asset are you working on today, right now, this week, that will still be paying you 5 years from now while you sleep. Because 70 pounds a week is a starting point. It is not a destination. And the distance between those two things is not luck. It is a decision about where your next available hour goes. That hour belongs to you. What you build with it is up to you.